Canadian Superbike Podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Canadian Superbike Podcast. Marshall Ferguson alongside Colin Fraser. First time, I think, maybe ever in the 2 years of the Canadian Superbike Podcast that we are doing a taping at night. So this is CSP After Dark, especially with Colin if you're watching on YouTube, because that is a dark background happening over there. But we'll get to that later. I do want to apologize to anybody that thought that I was coming to Edmonton. I unfortunately could not because I had to watch basically Bo Levi Mitchell and Kenny Lawler throw for 1 billion yards against Colin's beloved Toronto Argonauts. So I was calling that football game, which meant I couldn't get out to Edmonton. I missed the triple, unfortunately, but we'll get filled in on all of that coming up in just a minute here. I did get a chance, and I do want to start this off by saying a big thank you to Derek and everybody from the GDR Honda team, because I got a chance to go to Go for Dunes with my little man Noah. I've never been to a dirt event. I didn't know what the hell I was getting myself into. It's just a totally different experience than anything I've ever been around with Bridgestone CSBK, but it was fun and strange and enjoyable and all at the same time. Just a totally different world, Colin. I probably should have known that going in.
Well, it is a separate discipline. I mean, there is some overlap, but and a lot of people who road race also ride dirt bikes, although they, to some degree, downplay it because of the risk and the fact that the manufacturers are nervous about that. I mean, at a world level, almost everybody rides some kind of off-road, although they try and generally pass it off as flat track with the idea that less flying would be less severe injuries. And unfortunately, one of the most severe injuries in the history of people crossing over for discipline training was Jordan Szoke, who managed to very badly hurt himself without actually crashing his motorcycle.
Yeah, crazy. Just totally crazy. I think my favorite thing about, if I had to pick like a best and worst of my experience at Go for Dunes, best would be the fact that with a 4-year-old, you can go from where you're camping to the pond to go for a swim to the race in about 30 seconds. Like it is a perfect setup. Worst was probably the moment that and thankfully he only ate shit once, but he did eat shit on the e-bike track on his Stasic. And I looked over and just saw his goggles planted firmly into the dirt and he wasn't moving. And I was like, oh, good. All right, nice. Well, he got the full experience, I guess, now that we're here. So
Mother of the Year, yeah.
At
least he didn't drown in the pond, so that's good.
That's true. Well, life jackets were on, okay? Although I did talk to some people from the factory Yamaha team, and there was a mom there who said that her 2 sons did not have life jackets, and they didn't realize that the pond was 1 foot in. Oh, it's shallow. 2 feet in. Drop just off a cliff. So maybe be forewarned if you're going to go for it. But honestly, thank you to everybody from Honda and GDR Honda that had me come out and hooked us up. Yeah, it was a ton of fun. So thank you for that. But let's get back to all things Superbike here, because as I say, Colin was at Rad Torque. I was not. Before we get into the actual recap, as we usually do here on this podcast, we kind of pick like one worldly topic or something that is interesting to us. Saxon Ring is this weekend for MotoGP, obviously, and the big news in and around MotoGP that it's been happening slowly, crawling towards the finish line for quite some time, has been Liberty Media acquiring MotoGP from Dorna. And if I had to count in the dozens of links that Colin has sent me about this deal potentially, or maybe, or yes, it is happening, or the external impacts of this deal finally being approved on everything in motorcycle racing, it'd probably be 3 dozen if I had to guess, but I've loved every single one of them because it's helped educate me a lot on kind of the business of the sport and the background of it. So Colin, what are some of your overarching thoughts here?
I wait to see if it's significant and how quickly they'll make changes. I think, the hardcore fan, and it's interesting, there's a lot of discussion about there aren't very many people who cross over as both F1 and motorcycle racing fans. So I guess I'm one of those rare people because I do follow both of them. I grew up more involved with car racing and kind of hit my teenage years and got into motorcycling. But what they're going to change and why they're going to change it and what the value is. And I think, there's certainly worry about what's going to happen with the whole World Superbike and associated classes and the paddock there. I don't think they're going to take that apart anytime soon, partly because that's part of what they bought. That's some of the value. But it's funny, people talk about MotoGP all the time. World Superbike doesn't even get mentioned. Now, got to acknowledge World Superbike is not really a world championship. It's a European championship that goes to Australia. They haven't gone to the States in a while. They haven't gone to Japan. And given that a lot of the motorcycles are made in Japan and the United States is the birthplace of superbikes, it's kind of unfortunate that it's evolved that way. And the announcement, and we haven't touched on this, that World Superbike, who have been Pirelli forever and were the signature first spec tire series, they're switching to Michelin, which I think was some kind of internal power deal that Michelin lost their situation with MotoGP, and Pirelli perhaps were willing to help them with that. Brokered by Dorna. And at the time when that was happening, although you and I didn't speak about it, my suspicion was that was tied up in this European competition thing, that they were trying hard to show that they're going to try and spread out the value as far as they could. But allegedly, the people from the European Competition Council said they didn't see any conflict in all of this, which I find intriguing. And the implication being MotoGP and Formula One are not competing series. They must be to some degree. You also have to wonder, is there a lot of money out there waiting to be hooked up into MotoGP, because I believe most people who are brokering big sponsorship deals talk to everybody. If you talk to any of the major sponsors, they're certainly well aware of what's available in World Superbike and MotoGP and F1 and F2 and all the feeder series. So is it going to be a big change? I don't think so. I certainly hope not. When you buy something, it's usually better not to make a lot of change right away. But that the deal finally went through is obviously good news, and it's interesting. Formula One teams went from being worth close to nothing to being worth a lot of money now. And you could argue it's an interesting time right now specifically because the F1 movie's out. And if you want to see something that shows you what Liberty was prepared to do and the lengths they went to make things happen, that movie and the behind the scenes nature of it and the real true insider feel that you get with that is what Liberty is capable of. And we haven't even touched on Drive to Survive, which is the high tide that floated all boats, including, in my opinion, Canadian Superbike. Everybody in racing really benefited from Drive to Survive. Now, Dorna's version of Drive to Survive had some problems. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great, and it certainly wasn't Drive to Survive. Probably Liberty will be looking to fix that in the very near future.
Yeah, I mean, there's a billion directions we can go on that. Obviously, this is something that we could totally spend a full hour discussing, or even longer, because there's just a thousand different ways. But I guess my takeaway from this would be everything that I have read and listened to and watched has essentially said that the greatest boon for MotoGP with Liberty taking over is marketing and promotion. Like that is expected to be the thing that is you're going to reach more people, you're going to have more crossover. I think there's a lot of people who will be nervous about what the crossover looks like because you might not want MotoGP to be viewed as a subsidiary of anything or World Superbike as even more of a subsidiary of MotoGP but it's kind of an inevitability that they're going to try and class this thing and make sure that people understand that it's, like the Formula One movie. I saw it yesterday with my son. And the whole thing of it is, hey, Brad Pitt, do you want to be the best in the world? Because if you win in F1, you're the best in the world. And that's the whole idea that Dorna has pushed for the last couple of years with MotoGP, is it not? Where it's like, this is the ultimate. This is the elite. These are the top people, the top bikes, the top this stuff. It's like you go to watch a World Superbike race on your phone, you can't even get it. And I've asked you before, like with their app, the World Superbike app, Colin, why can I not do this? And you're like, well, it's because Dorna wants to make sure that you know that MotoGP is the thing. It's the accessible one. It gets the better numbers. It has the faster lap times. And all of those things I think are now going to be not called into question, but I think it'll be intriguing to see how Liberty decides to alter the landscape so that we now understand how they want people to view all of these things now that they own all of these things.
Yeah, it's a lot to grasp. I think the benefit will be North America because I think we are very underserved, and there's 300 and however many million people in the United States, 340 roughly, and then the Canadian population on top of that. I don't mean we're going to get a MotoGP in Canada. Don't worry, I'm not heading there. There's not the economy of scale to make that work, but there will be more big races, I believe, in the States. It'll be interesting if they can get themselves back to Indy. And by the way, F1 has done a good job, particularly with Drive to Survive, of sending that message that Formula One is the top series in the world. Those are the greatest drivers. The movie certainly drills down on that. But certainly in the Southeast United States, they would argue perhaps that a NASCAR driver is the greatest driver in the world. And in the greater Indianapolis area, I think they have a whole different perspective. And, you can make those arguments. They're not necessarily conclusive, but, Formula One, not everybody in there got there strictly on merit.
Yes. I guess in the spirit of the Formula One movie, underscoring this conversation off the top where they combat, combat. I'm just going to say, should I be going Barber or should I be going Laguna? Like, what's the track that you want to see them go to in the States, be it World Superbike or MotoGP?
Well, it's not what I want. It's what's practical. And unfortunately, I know a lot of the behind the scenes stuff. And the biggest problem is that most of the places aren't big enough to take enough people. So you figure, let's just take the Circuit of the Americas because it works right now. So you have, I believe, the biggest F1 crowd of the year, around 400,000 people over 3 days. And then MotoGP is, I think, 75,000 people on Sunday. And so right away, there's your first thing. You got a lot more room at Coda. Let's fill that up. But Laguna Seca, it doesn't hold 75,000 people, right? There isn't the space to put them in there. And we're not in Europe where the subway takes you straight to the track and all that kind of stuff. So, obviously, Barber would be the place we'd all like to go. But I just don't, again, 25, 30,000 people. Don't know, but don't forget they have an IndyCar race at Barber. So
Yeah.
maybe you take the hit, you have Barber, you get things started. Barber have talked about expanding the track. I keep circling back around at Indianapolis because it was a homologated venue. It will not be hard to turn that track back around into a MotoGP viable facility. And maybe they have a super weekend and they have MotoGP and something to do with other series.
Well, that was I guess my last question for you on this, outside of me just suggesting that all of this means there'll just be a random race in Las Vegas because now that Liberty owns it. But no, that's not going to happen. But do you expect at any, let's put a timeline on this. 2 years, 5 years? When do you expect, if you would expect it, that there would be a super weekend of MotoGP and World Superbike side by side?
I'm not sure that's ever going to happen. I think that's going to be complicated partially just by the reality of paddock size, right? Because you start bringing in a lot of huge trucks and it just the hospitality, because both of the infrastructure that supports those series is quite big, and Honda are going to have an internal argument about which truck they want to park where, because they would have a lot of vehicles. I mean, imagine Red Bull KTM, the amount of stuff they bring to the average race, particularly at MotoGP, right, where they might have 3 or 4 support classes and teams in all the different divisions. It's an interesting situation, and really probably we need to ask Red Bull, right? What does Red Bull prioritize, right?
Yeah.
Because they have a lot of money tied up with one company, Liberty, right? It's a huge financial commitment, and KTM would not be a player if it were not for Red Bull.
Would Moto America ever consider being on the B side of the album if MotoGP was coming to the States for an extra race?
Oh yeah, when I worked with AMA Pro, which was the precursor of Moto America, we ran the support classes at Laguna Seca. So yeah, that has already happened. I think it's less likely all the time because the structure of MotoGP is so much more entrenched now, right? It used to be you didn't always travel the support classes, being Moto 2 and Moto 3, but that's quite a bit different now. And their position in the series and on the schedule and how the television works is much more entrenched. And we would be remiss if we didn't mention, F1 has a great TV package, but arguably Dorna has the best TV package, right? The
Yeah.
most integration and the use of the high speed cameras and the slow mo in the middle and the graphics that come up that tell you, like, their packaging is second to none. And there was a time when it was borderline terrible, and they would just follow some Spanish guy for most of the race because most of the people watching were in
Yeah.
Spain. But we've come a long way, baby, and the quality of the build out for Dorna is fantastic.
Before we move on here, because I was going to save this until the end, but I just need to know now. What's your best performance and worst performance in the F1 movie?
Oh, okay. Well,
I'll go
I'm a
first
big
if you want a
fan of.
second. Hang on. I'll go
I'm
first.
I'm I'm a big fan of Bernie Collins. Clearly, there was a Bernie Collins character who played multiple elements of the story. Perhaps a few too many to be really in the least bit plausible. And I get it that they had everything that's ever happened that's wacky in a Grand Prix happen in that one season with Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
It's a stretch. I still enjoyed it. I was glad I saw it. I saw it twice because I wanted to see it IMAX and see if it's worth the extra money. Bad news, it's worth the extra money. In fact,
Yeah.
I would argue the first 5 minutes at the Daytona 24 hours with
Oh,
the for real Led Zeppelin Whole Lot of Love, not a cover, right? That alone in IMAX is worth them. If you got up and left as the 24 hours of Daytona was ending, you would have got your money's worth.
I'm gonna say worst performance was Martin Brundle because I thought that was it's very we know this from voicing CSBK races. It's hard to make not live feel live. Martin was not good at making those races feel live the way that they scripted what he was doing in that
No, I
movie.
was thinking to myself at the time, this is what Martin Brundle sounds like reading from a script. It's good they never asked him to do that because
Right.
it didn't come across. I mean, yes, they had Martin Brundle, but it didn't sound like Martin. I mean, I wonder if they should have just AI generated a Martin Brundle that would have sounded in the moment.
Which was strange because Crofty sounded perfect. Like Crofty calling the
So he's
races.
acting more.
Yeah. I don't know. That was strange to me because it was just side by side. You're like, man, Crofty's crushing all of these calls, and then it was like, Brando would just be like, and that's where they have to change the tires. And you're like, yeah, we get it, cool, that's all. And I get they're trying to reach a wide audience, whatever. And then I would say my best was Sonny Hayes. Yeah, Sonny. I mean, Brad Pitt's Brad Pitt, man. I mean, he can fake losing a card game in Vegas and then still win the woman. I mean, that's
Okay, so the best moment in the film is the disgruntled teammate who is out drinking in Las Vegas the night before a race. Probably won't ever see an F1
no,
rider
but he
driver
was
doing that.
drinking Heineken 0.0.
Okay.
They
Anyway,
slipped
he's
in the
still at a
advertising.
nightclub.
Yeah.
But attractive woman comes up to meet him. He seems encouraged, and this is honestly the best moment in the movie. The attractive woman says, "Are you a racing driver?" He says, "Yes." And the next thing she says, do you remember? Can
Can
you
you introduce
introduce
me to
me to
Carlos
Carlos
Sainz?
Sainz? And that is going to be behind dragging around behind Carlos Sainz the rest of his life.
That's so great. Then he says, "Yeah, I'll go get him," and then just gets up and says, "Yeah, no, it's time for me to leave for sure." But yeah, honestly, for me, and this is a little bit sentimental, but I've always done, the dad thing with Noah, where it's like we're watching F1, or even if we're watching MotoGP, we sit on my bike and he likes to lean over and pretend he's going through the corners or turn the fake wheel or all that stuff that little kids do when they're watching racing. And at the end of the movie, it's a 2 hour and 35 minute movie. So I'm holding on to Noah and I'm like just trying to make him, sit still for the last 10 minutes so we can get this in. And he grabs
So
my
he didn't
hand.
like the kissing parts
No,
probably
well,
very
or the
much.
swearing. You told me it was okay for kids, and then we're like 30 seconds in, and there was like a crap into this and to that, and I'm like, oh man, okay, it's fine, just get ready. But anyways,
Let's live with you.
yeah, I know I'm fairly good. But anyways, he grabs my hands on Brad Pitt's, over the top Hollywood finale ending, winning in Abu Dhabi on the final lap. Sonny, push! Grabs my hands and he starts leading me like around the corners in Abu Dhabi as I'm in the theater. I was like, this is 4D all of a sudden. We're like ripping back and forth together. But yeah, that was a cool experience. So, anyways, good movie, fun to talk about. And again, I'm sure we could talk forever about that too. But let's get to Edmonton. That's why we got here. You might not realize that because we're having so much fun hanging out. But hey, it's Canadian Superbike Pod after dark, so there's no rules. All right. Colin, you were on the ground. I have read all of Cam Bickle's wonderful reviews on CSBK.ca. From afar, just reading things through, it seems like whether it be because of the weather or because of varied performance or the way that the weekend turned out, the Superbike class had a ton of variety and a lot of excitement at a lot of different moments. Is that fair from afar?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of concern who would stumble, and none of the top three stumbled. After Saturday at Shuby, people were asking me, is that one of the best races we've ever had? Well, after Saturday at Edmonton, people were asking me that, and it was probably a better question. And, the joke in the paddock was it was just like a MotoGP race, except the last 2 minutes they raced as opposed to they settled with their, 0.12 back of the other guy. And, it's not obvious who has the best package, but I think my takeaway is Sam Guerin has come a long way, baby.
Yeah.
In the last year, Edmonton a year ago, he was really frustrated and things didn't go well, and he didn't feel like he could get out of the bike what he should. And now he seems to have become comfortable with the electronics and has a different philosophy about what he's doing. And Ben Young is riding as hard as Ben Young can, and Alex, when he's comfortable, when he has his confidence up, everything seems to be going well. Where we're headed on this, it's so strange. Dumas is now back in the points lead. It's 5 points, and with 25 points for a win, obviously CTMP is going to be crucial. But Guerin is within a shout, if you will. So it's 135 Dumas, 130 Young, I think 119 Guerin. So if Guerin hadn't had that horrible start at
Yeah.
Shannonville, he might be running away with this. So it's got an interesting situation for BMW because they kind of need their boys to gang up on the Honda.
Yeah, well, very much Apex Racing. I mean, right there at the end. But no, I love everything's going to connect to the F1 movie in this episode. But I obviously it's exciting for Ben to be able to get a victory, right? First victory on the Honda, and he
It's a monkey off his back. His first win this year, right? It's hard
right.
to believe.
Yeah, totally. And it's for him to be right there in the point standings in the season long competition, going into the final round, despite only having one win. If you would have told him that at the start of the season, he probably would have been like, "Wait, why have I not been on top step a little bit more often?" Because I think he, as much as he was transitioning and this was a challenge and it's all new and trying to get the bike together, and I think he wanted to really send a message that I can hop right off that thing and right into this one and just go. And it's been a challenge, but for him to be able to get that first victory, do you feel like now going into CTMP from again being on the ground and being in the paddock and all the rest that now it's just like, oh, I've got the win. I'm right there in the points. We're going to the final round. I can just go attack this thing. I'm hoping that he enters this fourth and final round of the season at Mosport coming up just fully wide open, going, what have I got to lose? I've taken this new effort this far. I'm this close. It's just time to go and try and get it against these two BMWs.
Well, the problem is we know what can happen at CTMP. In the last couple of years, it has been a BMW that clearly had the edge over any other combination. And there's two BMWs. One of them is brand new.
Yep.
And it's interesting. Fast Company is essentially Scott Miller. Scott Miller built the program for Dumas, and Scott Miller is an engine guy. So at Edmonton, that bike was so close to the limit, it was scary. It was less than a horsepower underneath 205 horsepower,
Wow.
highest number we've ever seen. And the weather swung a bit, and there's some circumstances, so there's not a lot of room left for Miller in terms of tuning. But he is going to give Dumas the sharpest possible knife to take to a knife fight. Young, I don't think he can ride the bike harder, and I think he's aware that he's kind of at the limit. And I think Shuby, he had to maybe back it off a notch after that. Although he was very, very aggressive in the last couple of laps at Edmonton, and you'll see that when we start getting in the nitty gritty of the video. There's some very, very good stuff there. So yeah, it's hard to say, but I am just concerned that Young doesn't have quite enough bike at Mosport, and I wonder what he thinks, privately, given how well he knows what the BMWs could do. And he, on the podium at Edmonton, was commenting that he knows what the BMWs can do, so he can factor that in to his decision making.
Yeah. And it also makes me wonder if he would have been able to make that last corner pass at Shuby's stick, how different would he be able to approach things going into the final round? Because that gave Sam Guerin obviously the victory and then the top step in the points and all the rest. But yeah, going into most part, like the way that the BMWs have worked so far this season, essentially trading great experiences round one, round two. Now you go into three. They're both very solid. They're stacking right up there with everybody. What is the thing that could potentially, if anything, get in the way of these BMW guys being able to go into CTMP and be able to just run away with the weekend?
Well, I think the Honda group downplay their race to race changes, but obviously with a new bike for this year, there have been race to race changes. Electronics all the time, some engine tuning stuff, particularly in terms of the induction system. Their integration of electronics improved a lot at Edmonton, but intriguingly, they made some changes in terms of how Ben likes to use the brakes. And he's not the latest king of the late breakers, the way, for instance, Guerin frequently is, but he needs consistent performance, and he wasn't pleased with that. And he commented that if he had the brake set up at Shuby that he had at Edmonton, he might not have had some of his struggles. And, for some people, what Ben was struggling with would have put you on the ground. For him, he's able to deal with it, save it, and complete it. And of course, those finishes at Shubenacadie between him and Guerin were, grandstand stuff, right?
Yeah.
Those guys were right at the ragged edge, pushing each other, which, in the end is what you'd like to see. And we haven't touched on Szoke, but Szoke was in and around for a while at Nova Scotia, and much more in and around, particularly in the wet at Edmonton. And I mean that the Sunday morning warm up in Edmonton, the conditions were just dreadful. The bus stop chicane there was, unfortunately, it's a place that the water drains to, and most of the guys went out and had a look around and tried to gauge the conditions. Of course, most of them haven't ridden there in the rain before. Guerin just went at it. He went out like he knew what he was doing. He was in full attack mode, and everybody saw that, saw the times, particularly early on, that he was, I think, at 1.4 seconds faster than anybody else, and that was how he chose to do it, and he rode the race more or less that way too. So that old got your teeth out, Sam Guerin, Slam and Sammy. That guy is still in there. I think he had a discussion with me about the wheels in line and riding with discipline. And I'm thinking, man, you need to talk to Torin Collins, because he straight up said, don't do this. And by the way, here you go, circling back to the movie, when Sonny is in the hot tub talking to the woman with the tire gun issue, right? He's telling her slow is fast and all this stuff. And
Yeah.
it's all that stuff that I believe Torin Collins told me was bullshit, right?
Yes, yeah, 100%. By the way, it was a cold tub. But I very much thought of that line and thought of Torin when I was actually at the movie. But before we get to Torin, and I want to ask you one more question before we get into super sports stuff. I just have so much respect for the way that Sam has bounced back from the first round, because like if he goes on to be within reach of the championship going into the final day, whether he wins, like whatever it is that happens at the end of this season, I don't think I'll ever forget the conversation that I had with Sam after the first race at Shannonville in round one, where standing at the podium, and I realized that Sam is just watching the podium in a race that he probably should have been either winning or very close to winning. And I was like, "Hey, what happened?" And he just basically like shook his head, and he looked so sad and disappointed, and just said that, like, it was throttle body, it was this, it was he was distraught. And I was like, "Well, get the typical, like, it's all right, man, like it'll get better." And he's like, "No, the championship's over." And he just straight up was like, "No, that, like, the whole like my season's done essentially." And I was
Boy,
like,
did he get that wrong.
and I was like, no, Sam, like it can't be. He goes, yeah, man, nobody else is gonna have like just a 0 point performance in the top 4 or 5. And I was like, you never know. Like somebody could. He's like, no, like you don't get, like they're not going. Like he just straight up was like, no, my season's essentially over. And so to see the way that he like goes into Shuby, double victory, goes into Edmonton, does his thing. He's battling through, like you say, he is as sharp as can be in a variety of different conditions. I'm like, is that not a ton of development from the kid that you met when he first showed up on the scene, like in terms of maturity and bounce back and understanding of how to push himself and resiliency and all of those things?
Yeah, and he's worked it in without anybody having a big catastrophe. And it's funny you talking about him being watching a podium he should have been on. When Van Winkle fell after battling with Collins, and Van Winkle was riding so well, and obviously doesn't have quite the package that Collins does. Van Winkle walked over the podium in his underwear, so he took off his leathers and was standing visiting with his friends at the podium, and being a good sport about the whole thing. And it's just weird, the way things sometimes play out.
Most impressive local before we get to the most impressive local that was in super sport. But there was a variety of Brian Worsdal was out there competing once again, and there was a handful of other ones as well that were in superbike for both.
Well, it depends on what you call a local,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I mean,
I mean, I would have to say Justin Napick, who at times, particularly in the rain, was impressive. Bizarrely, he's in his career been a superbike guy. Right now, he's concentrating on riding in 600 and super sport. But at times, he looked very good, and he's certainly the fast local. Ian Wall, who has at times done quite well, another fast local. He got hurt on Thursday, so we basically didn't ever see Ian. He we saw him; he was around, but he wasn't riding. Connor Campbell got hurt before we got going. John Lang got hurt early on. Both Campbell and Lang wound up in the hospital. Campbell hurt his back, but nothing that he probably can't recover from over time. Lang required surgery on his hip. So, although most of the front runners got their way through three races, and there was a lot of concern how that would work, a couple of people didn't really get to the start line or didn't get very far. And it's particularly hard for Campbell, who just can't seem to string a couple of sessions together without some kind of challenge.
Yeah, I it was terrible reading through the details of his injury, but I was very glad to see that he did put out a press release on CSBK's website and say, hey, there will be full recovery, he will be okay, and move forward with everything, but obviously done for the season based on the injuries he sustained to his back and his tailbone as well. So wishing Connor a speedy recovery. But in super sport, I mean, Torin coming in, we knew he was going to be incredibly difficult to contend with, and he certainly showed that throughout the extent of the weekend, didn't he?
Well, a couple of things. It's a track we didn't have doubts he would be strong at, so that question was answered before we went. The one thing hanging over him. Now we go to Mosport, a track that he doesn't appear to like very much and doesn't think it suits his style. But he doesn't need to come out of there with wins. He needs to come out there with solid results, and I think he's more than capable. Um, I think the biggest takeaway is if he had ridden Superbike, he probably would have been at least fifth, at least in every race. And I'm just checking where is he in points. So he's eighth. Probably would have put him up, around Phil de Gama Blanchette in the standings if he was doing all of those races. So, Collins is in a good spot in terms of winning that Super Sport Championship. He did end up using the B bike in the rain and he wasn't happy with it. In fact, we had a lot of people using their spare bikes who said they would never use them. Like Ben said, I don't think I can ever race that bike. And he ended up doing it because he just didn't want to risk his dry bike. And this, it's extremely difficult for bikes to be truly similar. The riders can almost always tell the differences no matter how hard the teams go. And when it rains like this and everybody gets on the B bike, it usually yields a whole bunch of new problems. But the flip side is how badly did Collins need to win in the rain, right? And the answer is not at all. And taking risks was not a good idea. And he showed. I mean, if he had won, if pardon me, if he had run Sunday morning in Superbike, I think he probably might have been able to battle Guerin, right?
Wow.
Who knows? But yeah, there's Collins is there. He is. I don't know what it's going to take. It's probably for the Altus team to break through, and there's all kinds of rumors and stories about what he could do next year. But unfortunately, Will, his stock is very, very high here. It's just barely percolating on the open market in the States, and he hasn't had that ride that he needs.
That seems crazy to me though. Like even when they cut to him, and I understand that yes, there's not very many opportunities and it is cutthroat business in order to get the proper ride and all the rest, but it's like I don't maybe I'm just biased because he's Canadian. We've seen him more up close this year because he had a memorable bit debut last year at Rad Torque and Superbike, but like watching what he's done in Moto America and battling against people and wheel to wheel and his style and his mentality and his youth and his background and then to see him go into super sport up here and be just flying from the get-go at places he doesn't think he's going to be comfortable and I'm not going to be quick and this and that. It's like again, I don't know how this business works nearly as well as you do, Colin. I have a hard time imagining why somebody would not take a massive swing on him.
Yeah, it's the unknown, right? They just don't have the confidence, and they don't see the potential. Which here, if he was on a decent BMW, I don't think anyone has any doubt he'd be right at the front battling with those guys because he's been on lesser equipment and managed to make it work. And he can dig a lot of lap time out of not a lot of bike. And boy, if there's ever anything you're looking for, there's a guy who's hungry, and he is just resolutely, religiously hungry every time he seems to get on the motorcycle.
So is Laurent La Liberté Girard, which, by the way, congratulations to him for getting another podium. He got one when he was out there in Juby. He got another as well, third place. And Sebastian Tremblay DNFs in race number one, gets a third place onto the podium in race two, and then not on the podium in race three. He has not climbed higher so far this season than third. in Supersport, which might be the surprise of the season. But it's really just the resurgence of obviously Torin being so damn competitive up at the front, Andrew Van Winkle being so good, but also Alex Michel at various points throughout the year taking a podium or two away from what probably previously would have been Sebastian Tremblay.
Well, unfortunately, right now, Michel is very consistent and he's consistently in front. And it's funny, I was looking at the points and, Vieira's in front of Tremblay. If you told him before the season started, you're going to be in front of Tremblay going into Canadian Tire Motorsport Park, he said, perfect, I'm going to win the title, right?
Right.
If
Yeah.
I'm in front of Tremblay.
And
No,
Vieira
no.
doesn't
And,
have
and I
a
mean,
podium.
no, and Vieira is desperate for a breakthrough and probably deserving. Just situationally, it hasn't played out for him. But Tremblay, I believe somehow or other, the pit lane speed limiter kicked in at one point with an electronics issue, and then there was some kind of mix up with the pit board, and he didn't know who was behind him and what was coming. And anyway, it was very disappointing, and it's disappointing to see a guy who's that good. And his Shubenacki wasn't great. He's taken out in somebody else's incident and whatnot. Now we're going to go to CTMP, and at times he has been unstoppable there. So we'll see. And again, I don't anticipate Collins necessarily getting into it at the lead. He might settle for strong positions, although racers have a lot of pride, and he's looking to clinch a number one plate. And he's a guy, a lot of his career, he's been banging around in the middle or further back when he was in Europe. So we'll see what Collins comes up with, right? He might want to have a big homecoming. We don't know.
Yeah, true. Also, I'm just wondering now if Torin Collins gets the number one plate, typically we like for the number one plate in Supersport to bump up to Superbike like we saw with David McKay a couple of seasons ago. Is Torin going to Superbike next year if he's winning Supersport this season?
I am suspicious that he's either going to defend his number one plate, maybe not on a Suzuki, or he will be full time in the States and will be preoccupied because he'll have a contract that expects him to focus on that. And I mean, as much as I'd like to have him around, and I always mention if you get a chance, go see him
Hmm.
because he is such an exciting rider. The best thing for Torin Collins is he has a paying gig in the United States.
Right.
The best thing for a lot of our guys would be if they had a paying gig in the States. There aren't many of them, so I'm not saying that like they're just going to start falling in people's lap. Ben Young was working in the States at one point, and was on a fairly good team and had a podium, but it's not easy, and the good thing about Ben Young is in a similar way to Torin Collins, Ben Young was in the British Superbike paddock. He was in the Moto America paddock. He is very realistic about what's possible. So his decision to take the risk with Honda and try something new in his career when he couldn't put an endurance ride together in the World Championship, that was an informed plan, and I would say right now it's playing out. I don't know exactly what Honda Canada thinks, but I think that they're pleased with his effort, and if it gets him in a position to be a favorite going into next year, I think that's worst case scenario right now. But did it work? This plan, this ambitious direction, I think it has. But that that Dumas is doing what is doing is not a surprise. What Guerin is doing, what he's doing, is a surprise.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's going to do it for us on this podcast. By the way, my favorite part of recording the episodes for TSN is having Colin giggle when Torin Collins does crazy things. But thank you to Colin as always. Thank you, Luke, for listening. Canadian Superbike podcast, and we'll talk to you later, Swan. Thank you.